Ancestor worship, the practice of venerating deceased family members and ancestors, has been a foundational aspect of human societies for millennia. It encompasses a diverse range of rituals, beliefs, and practices across different cultures, serving as a vital mechanism for preserving history, fostering a social cohesion, and connecting the living with the spiritual world. While its expressions vary, ancestor worship universally reflects the belief that the spirits of the deceased continue to influence the living, offering protection, wisdom, and guidance. This tradition is deeply intertwined with concepts of family, lineage, and community, often functioning as a means of reinforcing social structures, moral values, and collective identity. Across ancient civilizations from China and Egypt to indigenous cultures such as in Africa and the Americas, ancestor worship has been central to maintaining harmony, continuity, and respect for those who came before. The veneration of ancestors also serves as a way of coping with the inevitability of death, creating a lasting bond between the living and the deceased. In modern times, however, the practice of ancestor worship faces challenges. The rise of secularism, individualism, and scientific rationalism has led some to question the relevance of such traditions. Meanwhile, in globalized societies, there is a growing interest in reconnecting with ancestral roots, with people from various backgrounds reinterpreting and adapting ancestor worship to fit contemporary values. Today's video will explore the historical context of ancestor worship, its cultural variations across the world, the rituals and practices that accompany it, and the spiritual and psychological significance it holds for practitioners. But first, I would just like to mention that if you would like to support me and this channel, then please head on over to my Patreon, where you can subscribe to the supporter tier for $3 a month, or get into more magical leanings and teachings with various other tiers, especially those of the Temple of the Horned Serpent. And I would just like to send out my appreciation to all of those that have joined and are supporting me in this manner. Thank you very much. So, ancestor worship is one of the oldest and most widespread religious practices in human history, with roots tracing back to ancient civilizations. From early hunter-gatherer societies to the advanced cultures of antiquity, the reverence for the dead has served as a cornerstone of spiritual and social life. Throughout history, ancestor worship has been integral not only to religious practice, but also to the establishment of moral codes, societal structures, and cultural continuity. In ancient China, ancestor veneration was a central component of Confucianism, where respect for ancestors was tied directly to the concept of filial piety, or xiao. The Shang dynasty from the 16th to 11th century BCE is one of the earliest examples of systematic ancestor worship, where ancestral spirits were believed to influence the fortunes of their descendants. The Zhao dynasty further cemented the practice, incorporating it into the state apparatus as part of maintaining political and social stability. Rituals such as offerings of food, incense, and symbolic sacrifices were regularly performed at ancestral altars, and it was believed that by honoring ancestors, one could gain their protection, wisdom, and blessings. In ancient Egypt, ancestor worship was also deeply ingrained in the culture, though it was intertwined with the worship of gods. Egyptians viewed the afterlife as a continuation of life on earth, where the souls of ancestors, as well as the pharaohs, could influence the living. Tombs were often constructed with offerings and inscriptions to ensure the deceased's safe passage into the afterlife. It was believed that ancestors could provide guidance and protection in the material world. Mummification as a method of preserving the body was not only a religious ritual, but also an act of honoring ancestors, ensuring their continued presence within the community. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, the practice of ancestor worship was pivotal in maintaining social order. Ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians placed great importance on maintaining relationships with the spirits of the deceased, particularly through rituals at family graves. It was believed that ancestors, especially those with significant achievements, could influence the living in both positive and negative ways. The preservation of family memory through record and rituals ensured the ancestors' enduring presence and societal influence. In Africa, ancestor worship is one of the most endured spiritual practices, and it remains central to many contemporary African beliefs. In traditional African religions, ancestors are seen as intermediaries between the living and the divine, playing an essential role in the spiritual and material well being of their descendants. African diasporic religions such as Vodou in Haiti and Santeria in Cuba maintain the veneration of ancestors, adapted through syncretism with Catholicism. Ancestral shrines and altars are common in many African communities, and rituals often involve dance, music, and offerings to invoke the ancestors' blessings and protection. Among indigenous cultures in the Americas, Australia, and Polynesia, ancestor worship manifests through spiritual practices that honor the spirits of the land, the dead, and the ancestors who came before. Native American communities, for instance, often perform rituals involving storytelling, feasts, and ceremonies to honor the spirits of their ancestors. Similarly, Indigenous Australians maintain strong spiritual ties with their ancestors through Dreamtime stories, which pass down knowledge, moral teachings, and cosmological understandings. These practices highlight the deep connection between the land, spirituality, and the ancestors who are seen as the original stewards of the earth. Through these diverse examples, it is clear that ancestor worship has been a pervasive and deeply influential aspect of human history. It has shaped not only religious life, but also the way societies construct their understanding of family, power, and social relations. In each case, the relationship between the living and the dead is viewed as a dynamic and reciprocal one, wherein ancestors provide guidance, protection, and wisdom in exchange for proper veneration. Ancestor worship varies widely across cultures, each community adapting its rituals, beliefs, and practices to reflect its unique worldview, social structure, and spiritual needs. While the reverence of ancestors remains a constant theme, the methods by which it is expressed and the roles ancestors play in different societies can differ significantly. In East Asia, particularly China, ancestor worship is deeply embedded in Confucian values, where the concept of filial piety or xiao is paramount. This practice involves not only honoring one's parents and ancestors, but also maintaining their memory through rituals performed on specific dates, such as the Jingming festival or the Tomb Sweeping Day. These ceremonies often involve offerings of food, incense, and symbolic gifts to ensure the ancestors' spiritual well being and to receive their blessings. The Chinese view of the afterlife is one of continuity, with ancestors believed to hold power over the fortune and prosperity of their descendants. This belief extends beyond familial ties to influence the community and, in some cases, political leadership, where rulers are seen as guardians of both the living and the ancestral spirits. In Japan, Shinto and Buddhism intertwine with ancestor worship. The Japanese honor their ancestors through the observance of Obon, a Buddhist tradition that spans several days in the summer. During Obon, families gather to clean and decorate the graves of their ancestors, often offer food and light incense. The belief is that the spirits of the ancestors return to the family home during this time, and it is a time to celebrate their lives and seek their protection. This practice reflects a belief in the cyclical nature of life and death, as well as the idea that ancestors remain active participants in the family's life. In Africa, ancestor worship takes many forms depending on the region and culture. For example, in the Yoruba religion, which originates from the West African region, ancestors are revered as spiritual protectors and intermediaries between the living and the divine. The Yoruba believe in the importance of maintaining a harmonious relationship with their ancestors through prayers, sacrifices, and offerings at family shrines. These rituals are thought to secure the well being of the living and ensure prosperity and success in the community. Ancestors are also invoked during important life events such as births, weddings, and rites of passage, where their blessings and guidance are sought. This practice extends into Cuba and the Caribbean, where African diasporic religions like Vodou and Santeria combine elements of Catholicism with ancestral veneration. In these traditions, ancestors are honored through elaborate ceremonies involving music, dance, offerings, and spirit communication, with the goal of fostering a deep connection between the living and the dead. In the Zulu culture of South Africa, ancestors are similarly honored through offerings of food, cattle, and libations. Drumming, singing, and dancing are also important parts of the rituals, helping to create an environment in which the living can connect with the ancestors' spirits. In indigenous cultures of North America, South America, and Australia, ancestor worship is often tied to a deep spiritual relationship with the land. For many Native American groups, ancestors are not only honored in ritual, but are believed to be physically present in the natural world. Through sacred stories, ceremonies, and offerings, Native Americans maintain a sense of continuity with their ancestors, whose wisdom is believed to be embedded in the land itself. These rituals might include drumming, feasting, and communal prayer to call upon the spirits of the ancestors for guidance and strength. Indigenous Australians also hold their ancestors in high esteem through the dream time, a belief system that connects past, present, and future. Ancestors are thought to inhabit the landscape, and rituals often involve interaction with sacred sites, storytelling, and passing down knowledge. The land and its features are seen as physical manifestations of the ancestors' spiritual presence, reinforcing the link between the living, the dead, and the environment. In the Pacific Islands, particularly among the Polynesian and Melanesian cultures, ancestor worship plays a central role in social organization and religious life. In Hawaiian culture, the worship of Akua, or the gods, and Omakua, the ancestral spirits, is fundamental. Omakua are considered guardians of families, and the rituals often involve offerings of food, flowers, and chants to call upon their protective powers. This practice not only strengthens familial ties but also connects the community with its ancestral past. Similarly, in Tonga and other islands in the South Pacific, ancestor worship is intertwined with the concept of mana, a spiritual force believed to reside in both the living and the dead. Ancestors are venerated through ceremonies that uphold social structures and honor the roles they played in sustaining the community. In Western cultures where ancestor worship has been a little less prominent, except for in the distant past, a resurgence of interest has emerged in recent decades with the rise of neo-pagan practices such as Wicca and modern witchcraft. Many have turned to ancestor veneration as a means of reconnecting with their roots. These practices, often incorporating elements of folk traditions, focus on honoring ancestral spirits through altars, rituals, and seasonal festivals. In Europe, certain regions maintain long-standing practices of ancestor worship, particularly through the observance of All Saints' Day, which blend Catholicism with Christian customs. The focus is on remembering and honoring the dead through prayers, offerings, and festivals. All Saints' Day originated with the practices surrounding Samhain, when the veil between the living and the dead is believed to be thinnest. During Samhain, practitioners of witchcraft may set up ancestral altars, offering candles, food, and symbolic items. In some practices, ancestors are honored through rituals that involve invoking their names, seeking their wisdom, and connecting with their energy. In modern witchcraft practices, ancestors are often consulted through divination and prayer. These practices emphasize the importance of maintaining a direct relationship with one's ancestors for spiritual growth and protection. Despite the differences in expression, what remains constant across these diverse cultures is the deep respect for the ancestors, the belief in their continued influence, and the desire to maintain a connection to them through rituals, storytelling, and remembrance. Ancestor worship serves as a bridge between the past and present, reinforcing communal bonds and providing guidance in both spiritual and practical matters. Ancestor worship holds profound spiritual and psychological significance, acting as a bridge between the realms of the living and the dead. At its core, this practice reflects a belief in the continuity of life, where death is not seen as an end but as a transition to a new state of existence. The rituals associated with ancestor worship offer comfort, guidance, and a sense of connection to a broader spiritual reality, providing individuals and communities with a means of navigating both the material and spiritual dimensions of life. One of the most fundamental spiritual aspects of ancestor worship is the belief in the ongoing presence of the ancestors. In many cultures, ancestors are not simply remembered but are believed to remain actively involved in the lives of their descendants. This connection fosters a sense of continuity where the past, present, and future are seen as interconnected. Ancestors are viewed as protectors, guiding and watching over their descendants from the spirit world, offering blessings, wisdom, and intervention when needed. This belief in spiritual continuity helps individuals feel anchored in a larger cosmic order, providing a sense of belonging to a lineage and a broader community. For instance, in Chinese culture, the practice of ancestor worship is intertwined with the belief that ancestors can influence the fortunes of the living. By performing rituals and making offerings, families seek to maintain harmony with their ancestors and ensure their favor. Similarly, in African cultures, ancestors are seen as the custodians of wisdom and tradition, and their spiritual presence is believed to protect the community and guide its members. This enduring connection with the ancestors affirms the belief in a cyclical view of existence, where life is understood as an ongoing flow, with the spirits of the dead continuing to shape the world of the living. Ancestor worship also provides a psychological comfort by addressing the existential realities of death and grief. In cultures where ancestor veneration is practiced, death is not viewed with finality, but as a part of a natural cycle. This perspective can alleviate the fear and trauma associated with the loss of loved ones, as individuals take solace in the idea that their ancestors remain with them in spirit. Rituals such as offerings and prayers create opportunities for the living to express their grief and reverence, facilitating the healing process. In many cultures, rituals are designed not only to honor the dead, but also to help the living cope with the loss and seek emotional closure. The belief that ancestors continue to watch over the descendants also contributes to a sense of emotional stability and security for individuals facing challenges, whether personal, financial, or social. Turning to the ancestors for guidance can offer reassurance and a sense of direction. This psychological benefit is especially powerful in times of crisis, where ancestral worship and protection provide a grounding force amidst uncertainty. In some cultures, ancestors are also seen as spiritual guardians, offering protection against misfortune and evil, further reinforcing the sense of safety that ancestor worship can provide. In a deep psychological level, ancestor worship plays a crucial role in shaping cultural identity. The rituals and practices associated with ancestor veneration serve as a link to one's heritage, fostering a sense of pride and continuity. For individuals in diaspora communities such as Africa, Caribbean, or indigenous groups, ancestor worship can be a powerful means of maintaining cultural identity and resilience in the face of historical trauma, such as colonization and displacement. The act of honoring one's ancestors becomes a form of resistance against cultural erasure, preserving traditions and stories that might otherwise be lost. In addition to strengthening cultural identity, ancestor worship can also facilitate personal growth. The reverence of ancestors encourages reflection on the values and teachings passed down through the generations. In many traditions, ancestor worship is accompanied by storytelling, where the deeds and virtues of ancestors are shared with younger generations. This process of learning from the past helps individuals understand their place within the broader framework of family, community, and history. For many, the guidance of ancestors provides a source of strength and clarity in navigating personal challenges, allowing individuals to draw on the wisdom of their forebears when making decisions or facing adversity. Ancestor worship often instills a sense of responsibility in the living, reinforcing the importance of ethical living and familial duty. In cultures where ancestral reverence is central, there is often an emphasis on maintaining the honor of the family and upholding the values passed down through generations. Ancestors are not only revered but for their spiritual power, but also for their moral and ethical teachings. By honoring their ancestors, individuals are reminded of the importance of living in accordance with the values that have shaped their lineage. This sense of responsibility extends beyond individual actions to the broader community, fostering a spirit of cooperation, respect, and mutual care. In cultures such as those in Africa, where ancestor worship is closely tied to social order, the living are encouraged to align their actions with the expectations of their forebears. Ancestors are seen as custodians of the community's moral code, and the living are tasked with preserving and transmitting these ethical principles to further generations. This sense of duty creates a shared commitment to uphold communal values, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancestors continues to influence contemporary life. In some traditions, ancestor worship includes rituals that are aimed at healing and spiritual cleansing. For example, in African spiritual practices, ancestor veneration is often part of larger rituals designed to address emotional or spiritual imbalance. These ceremonies may involve prayers, songs, drumming, and other forms of spiritual expression meant to invite the ancestors to offer their healing energies. Similarly, in traditions where ancestor worship is closely tied to the land and nature, healing rituals often involve a return to sacred sites, where the offerings are made and prayers are said to invite ancestral spirits to restore balance. Ancestor worship, therefore, can serve as a therapeutic practice that addresses both individual and collective needs, whether through the emotional comfort of knowing that ancestors provide spiritual support, or the more tangible act of performing rituals for personal healing. These practices offer a sense of empowerment and restoration. While ancestor worship is often seen as a practice rooted in tradition, it continues to evolve and hold relevance in the modern world. In a time of rapid globalization, technological advancement, and cultural shifts, the practice of venerating ancestors has adapted to fit contemporary values and needs. In many societies, ancestor worship remains an integral part of family and community life, albeit with modifications that reflect the complexities of modern living. For many people living in the diaspora, those who have migrated from their ancestral homelands to other parts of the world, ancestor worship becomes a means of preserving cultural identity and connection to their roots. In countries where they are in the minority, individuals may face pressure to assimilate, leading to the dilution of cultural practices. Ancestor worship, however, can serve as a powerful counterpart to this process, offering a tangible way to maintain ties to one's heritage and resist cultural erasure. In the African diaspora, particularly in the Americas, ancestor worship is often blended with other spiritual traditions such as Christianity, Vodou, Santeria, and Candomblé, forming syncretic practices that reflect both the challenges and creativity of cultural survival. In these contexts, the veneration of ancestors is not only about honoring the dead, but also about reclaiming cultural agency and asserting the spiritual legacy of African heritage. Practices such as ancestor altars, offering food, drink, and incense, and invoking ancestral spirits during spiritual ceremonies remain prevalent in many diaspora communities. These rituals are vital in maintaining the psychological and emotional connections to the past, especially for descendants of enslaved Africans whose cultural heritage was deliberately disrupted by colonization. Similarly, among indigenous people in the Americas, Australia, and elsewhere, the importance of ancestral veneration is being revitalized as part of broader movements for cultural preservation and autonomy. In these communities, ancestor worship is often closely tied to land, nature, and traditional knowledge. Ancestor reverence in the modern context can serve as a form of spiritual resistance against the ongoing impact of colonization and environmental degradation, reinforcing the importance of maintaining a connection to the land and ancestral practices. As societies become increasingly secular and modernized, the practice of ancestor worship has also adapted to new cultural and spiritual contexts. In many parts of the world, particularly in urban settings, the traditional physical rituals associated with ancestor worship, such as elaborate ceremonies and feasts, have been simplified or modified. Ancestor worship may no longer always be a communal event. It might take place in the privacy of one's home or even in the form of personal symbolic acts such as lighting a candle or placing photos of ancestors on an altar. In East Asia, especially in countries like China, Japan, and Korea, where ancestor worship has long been integral to family life, it continues to be practiced in modern ways. For example, the practice of the Xingming or the tomb sweeping day in China is still widely observed, though it may now include the use of technology such as online memorials. Similarly, in Japan, many people still visit ancestral graves during the Obon festival, but the ways in which they honor their ancestors can range from traditional rituals to simpler acts like offering incense or prayers at home. This evolution reflects a broader trend in which traditional practices adapt to the changing social and technological landscape. In the West, ancestor worship is increasingly being embraced by those exploring alternative spiritual practices, such as neo paganism and witchcraft. For many practitioners of these spiritual traditions, ancestor veneration is seen as a way to reconnect with the earth, the natural world, and personal heritage, as well as tapping into the knowledge that our ancestors hold. These movements may incorporate elements of ancestor worship into their broader spiritual frameworks, emphasizing ancestral wisdom, healing, and guidance. The reverence of ancestors within these contexts often focuses on personal empowerment as individuals seek to learn from the lives of their forebears and draw strength from their legacies. The rise of technology has provided new tools for the practice of ancestor worship, allowing people to engage with their ancestral heritage in ways that were previously unimaginable. Social media, for example, has become a platform where individuals and communities can share stories of their ancestors, create digital altars, and organize virtual ceremonies. Online memorials where people can post photos, biographies, and tributes to their ancestors have become increasingly common, providing an accessible space for people to honor their family history, even if they are geographically distant from their ancestral homes. In addition, the growing interest in genealogy and family history research has brought ancestor worship into a more personalized realm. Many people, especially in Western societies, are now turning to DNA testing services to trace their ancestral roots. These genetic discoveries often lead to an increased interest in understanding the lives of our ancestors and incorporating their legacy into our personal spiritual practices. This modern fascination with ancestry is not limited to those who practice formal ancestor worship, but also extends to individuals who may engage in personal rituals or acts of remembrance without formal religious affiliation. However, the use of technology in ancestor worship is not without its criticisms. Some argue that virtual and online practices may dilute the authenticity of traditional rituals and disconnect individuals from the communal and physical aspects of ancestral veneration. In some cultures, the tactile sensory elements of rituals, such as preparing offerings, visiting graves, and participating in communal rites, are considered vital to maintaining a meaningful connection with the ancestors. Critics are of the modernization of ancestor worship suggest that while technology can enhance the practice, it may also reduce the depth of engagement with the living tradition. For those in secular societies where religious belief in the traditional sense is on the decline, ancestor worship may be seen more as a cultural or psychological practice than a spiritual or religious obligation. In this context, ancestor veneration can function as a means of connecting with one's family history, understanding personal identity, and finding emotional healing. Psychological approaches to ancestor worship suggest that honoring one's ancestors can provide a sense of continuity, stability, and belonging, particularly in times of uncertainty or personal crisis. This sense of connection to the past can offer comfort and perspective, helping individuals to navigate modern challenges by drawing on the wisdom and strength of their forebears. In the field of depth psychology, ancestor worship can be seen as a way of integrating the unconscious into conscious life. Carl Jung, for example, argued that ancestral memory and collective unconscious have a profound influence on the individual psyche. From this perspective, the act of honoring ancestors becomes not only a cultural practice but also a therapeutic tool, enabling individuals to work through unresolved family dynamics and generational trauma. Ancestor worship, with its deep roots in human history and cultural expression, continues to serve as a vital practice for many communities around the world. Through the veneration of ancestors, individuals connect with their past, find meaning in their heritage, and seek spiritual guidance. The rituals, beliefs, and structures surrounding ancestral worship vary widely across cultures, yet they all share a common thread: the belief that the dead maintain a presence and influence in the lives of the living. From family altars in East Asia to commemoration of ancestral spirits in African and indigenous traditions, ancestor worship offers a profound means of maintaining continuity between generations and grounding individuals in their identity and history. However, ancestor worship is not without its challenges. In an age marked by rapid technological advancement, secularism, and the global movement of peoples, traditional practices face tensions between preservation and adaptation. Critics raise valid concerns about the potential for cultural stagnation, commodification, and the ethical dilemmas posed by venerating ancestors whose actions may have contributed harm. Despite these criticisms, the practice endures, continuously evolving in response to the modern world while remaining deeply meaningful to those who adhere to it. In the modern context, ancestor worship serves not only as a personal or familial practice, but also as a powerful tool for cultural reclamation and resistance. It allows communities, particularly those who have been historically marginalized, to assert their identities and reconnect with their roots in ways that are both empowering and transformative. At the same time, the practice faces new questions about the role of tradition in a rapidly changing world where modernity and globalization threaten to dissolve the very practices that once defined cultural communities. Ultimately, ancestor worship represents the enduring human desire to make sense of life, death, and the interconnectedness of past and present. While it faces complex challenges, its continued relevance and adaptability in the face of modern critiques suggests that it will remain an essential part of many cultural and spiritual practices for generations to come. Through this lens, ancestor worship is not merely a static tradition, but a dynamic expression of the human quest for meaning, belonging, and continuity in an ever-changing world. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Cheers for now. Bye bye.